Hello, everybody. We are joined once again by GM Jon Ludvig Hammer, aka The Hammer. And if you missed our last talk, it was amazing. We talked about how Nepo and Carlsen shared second place. Beautiful discussion. We thought we'd have them again. This time, we're going to talk about something totally different, though. We're talking about should beginners learn chess openings? We're having a little debate, but a couple interesting things about the debate on the sidelines of the debate is the Hammer has a new opening course on Chessable, which you should check out. It features the French and the Queen's Gambit declined. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And we're also going to talk about the Chessable controversy. And that'll be something I'll just introduce here. The details are a little bit still murky, but there's loads of courses on Chessable. And basically for years, Chessable has had, whether it was a pro author or just somebody submitting a course, there was always like a skeleton overview of the opening. And it was called the short and sweet. It was a way for you to kind of maybe get into the course. Maybe you can buy it. But really, if you're a beginner, that's what you should be doing anyway, if you're going to do anything at all. That little short and sweet course, loads of people did it. They loved it. Easy to learn. Bam, bam, bam. Anyways, they've walked it back. We're going to talk a little bit more about the details of that. But first, I'm going to turn it over to the Hammer, and we're just going to open up the question right away. Hammer, why should beginners learn openings?
I think it's valuable for people to have a foundation of understanding and something that feels familiar to start out the game. And I think one of my main arguments, and I suppose I'm open to changing the order of my arguments as I hear your counterpoints, but I think it's very valuable for motivation that you don't get blown off the board when you're playing. And I think there is real value to having a understanding of opening principles, and maybe those opening principles in not only in theory but only in practice through some example lines that you've learned. I think that can be a boost to your chess progress, and I also think it will be helpful to avoid some slumps that can really affect your motivation for the game.
Okay, now maybe I want to just set the debate clear here. When you say a beginner, let's just try to dial that in. What are we talking about? Let's say whether it's ChessCom rating, or we have a great translation system at the dojo. So you tell me any rating that you'd like to use, except maybe the Norwegian one, and I can translate it into like a ChessCom or a Lichess rating. So what range are we talking about when you say beginner?
Yeah, very important question, but tread carefully, because people get very upset, and rightfully so, because a lot of people out there feel like the term beginner should apply to people that are literally learning the rules of the game. Whereas chess professionals, we often extend the term beginner to like 1200, way out there rating.
Right.
So yeah, we gotta be real specific here.
Yeah, I very specifically didn't use beginners in my course. And when I've been promoting the course, I've been saying budding players and that kind of thing. So now I'm very nervous that beginner is going to be in the title of this podcast. I've aimed my course, but of course that's an incredibly difficult exercise to do. And the feedback I've gotten is that there are 2,000 rated rapid players on chess.com who's found my course very, very useful. But my goal that I set out to try and create something for is 800 to 1300 chess.com rapid.
Good.
You may now translate.
Yeah, it's good that you aimed it somewhere. It's important. You have to have a focus on a specific audience when you make a piece of instruction. So 800 to 1300 chess.com. Good.
And does that?
No, not chess.com. No, because this is important. And maybe this is a part of the discussion that needs to be had. But the difference between chess.com Blitz and chess.com Rapid ratings is massive. There's a minimum of a 300-point gap.
I meant Rapid as well. That's the number we usually deal with. The Blitz ratings also have a lot of like outliers up or down. Like there will be people we see lots of them who are 800 points higher or lower rated in Blitz. Like they either can't move or they're speed demons, but they don't see where the pieces are. They just flag the opponent. It's all over the place, actually, the Blitz. The Blitz ratings and the Rapid. So we normally deal with 800 with chess.com Rapid ratings.
Yeah. And so we're saying 800 to 1300 is kind of where you're talking about. So okay, let me just do a couple translations for people out there because a lot of people aren't familiar with the ChessCom. So we by the way at the dojo we had to normalize all the ratings to come up with one universal rating system to rule them all. So for us 850 to 950 is, we call that 600 to 700. For Lichess though, 850 to 950 is like 1430 to 1500. That's USCF 680, 790. And then we go on. We can talk about English and yada, yada. And then 1300, that's more like 1100 cohort of our business. And so 1350 is 1100 in the dojo system, and then 1730 Lichess. And I'll just mention those because those are the most common.
And can I just ask a question to Hammer? So for reference, our opening work in our training program starts at around like 1100. I don't know, might be 1100 Rapid, 1100 FIDE, maybe a little bit higher. But Hammer, does your course, does that correlate to where you think people should start studying openings? Like, would you say under 800 ChessCom Rapid, they shouldn't touch the openings, or how would you approach it?
I'm not an absolutionist. Absolutist. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Absolutist in any way. I think for chess progress, the most success you're going to have is just doing what you enjoy. Personally, I believe that opening work in chess is something that you should reserve for when you're stagnating. As long as you're making progress, doing your tactics, your end games, your puzzles, all of that, I don't feel like it's necessary to do opening work because you're always experiencing the joy of progress regardless. Openings, I think, is kind of like a cheat code that no matter where you are in your progression, working on openings is going to improve your rating. I think, and you guys can argue against this, but I think that it is a given. If you put work into the opening, it's going to pay off. You're going to get cheap points that you wouldn't otherwise get. You're going to avoid opening traps. You're going to catch your opponent in a couple at the same time. It's the easy bailout to improvement. And because of that, I think it should be reserved to when you're maybe not disenchanted with the game, but when you're struggling, when your motivation is faltering a little bit and you feel like I want to take the next step. I don't want to quit on this, but this feeling of not making progress is actually affecting my willingness to play the game. That's when I think you should be working on openings, and that I think is true for people starting out to the game, but I also think it rings true up to grandmaster level. I think openings is a great way of reaching a next level, or it doesn't even have to be a next level, right? It just has to be about raising your rating, which in turn will give you motivation and enthusiasm, regardless of whether it has really made you a better chess player. Maybe you just got better at, avoiding some opening traps or making your opponent fall into some of your opening traps. Does that make you a better chess player? I'm not sure, but it will increase your rating, which in turn will affect your motivation, because reality is we often, the rating is such an easy way to monitor your progress, and it feels good seeing numbers go up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, before I wail in, before I dig in there, I just want a couple more markers for the debate here. So I think an important thing for people to recognize is that I believe it's the average rating for Chess.com. Okay, so imagine when we say this, we're talking about everybody who's ever logged in and played a game. We're talking about some grandma or grandpa just logged in one time. We're talking about a lot of people. That average rating is about 750. Right, so that's just below where Hammer is saying this opening course is applicable to, and that means, though, there's a huge amount of people that are below that rating, right? A huge amount of people, and we have a lot of those people in the dojo in our lower cohorts. All right, so Hammer, I want to ask you a question. I feel like you have a very privileged position in chess, one that I'm often jealous of. You get to hang out with a lot of highfalutin players with a lot of highfalutin ideas. When was the last time you spent some good hours looking at the games of players in this group that you're talking about, between 800 and 1300 Chess.com?
800 to 1,000, I would say probably never.
Uh-huh.
But my main experience with this, and what the course is slightly based on, is the work I did with Benji Fishy, a Fortnite player, now turned Valorant pro, who participated in the PogChamps 3, organized by Chess.com, and who I knew some of the people. I knew his Fortnite partner, or the dad of his Fortnite partner. Anyway, I had some personal connections to Benji. And I asked him, are you interested in getting some coaching? I'm willing to set aside an hour a day for the duration of from now until the tournament is over, at the same time every day, and we can make a proper chess player out of you. And we ended up working together, I would say like 45 to 50 days for an hour each day. And Benji progressed from 800 to 1,500 in that period.
That's very impressive. Yeah, very impressive. Okay, so let me just say a little bit about. I feel I have a privileged viewpoint on this, because every week, every Wednesday for the last several years now, this has been going on years, I go over the games of people who have graduated in the dojo program, and that just means they went from one cohort to one higher. So imagine our 600 to 700 cohort, that translates to 850, 950 Chess.com Rapid, graduating and say to 700, 800. So that'd be 950, 1050 Chess.com. And so what I do is I look at what they've trained on. I can see everything. And then I go over one of their games that they have annotated.
Yeah. Right? And Jeffy, just like a quick word.
Yeah.
You've generally got, in the sort of under 1,000 show, you've generally got like 20 graduations in a given week, right? So you're seeing about 20 games a week for the last 100 weeks.
Right. It's been a lot. And so just to put that in perspective, I usually, I do it to people for people who've graduated up into the 1,000, 1,100. And by the way, when I started, it was all one show. I did all the graduations in one, but now we have so many people in the dojo, I had to split it up. It was too intense. So anyways,
just so we're clear, shameless plug. These are students in the dojo training program that are graduating. They're going up a level, meaning they like reach the next threshold. They've been working. They're in our program, etc. All right, go on.
So I do the one show that goes for people who have graduated all the way up into the 1,000 to 1,100. So they've broken out of Plato's cave, right? They're out of this 1,000 barrier. And so that was just a natural split for me. And then to do the other people on Thursday. So, at this point, thousands and thousands of games. And so to give you just a short spiel of what I've learned, I would say 80 to 90% of the path to getting out of that 1,000 barrier, again, that's 1250 ChessCom, is for them to get a grip on the board. And what I mean by that is I don't mean fancy tactics. I mean basically the ability to see what's attacking what. And what generally happens is somebody hangs, usually there's more than one hanging of something in the game. And what that tells me is it's actually very difficult to establish a grip on the board. I think a lot of players, GMs, IMs, whatever, they take that for granted. But when I look at these games, I see, these people are working hard, and it takes time, especially if they're adults, to gain a grip on the board. And when I really want to say this word grip, because tactics is too fancy. We're not talking about like deep calculation. We're talking about somebody hanging something. That's what's going on here. And it's hard to learn. Okay, number two.
The vision of all the files and diagonals.
Right.
The tension between two knights that are attacking each other. Who's defending?
Right. And so also important is taking your time. So this is the other thing I've learned on doing this show, because we have the amazing time graph at the dojo. So I'm allowed to see how much time each player spent on each move. And what I can see there is a large majority of people they are not able to slow down. And part of it's being online, but part of it's just being a new player, that there's so much nervous energy and there's so much, tension. You make this impulsive move without thinking. If you slow down, it's going to help, and it'll help your vision as well, your grip. You're going to hang less stuff. Okay, finally, this is the third less important thing, but I put it in here. It's developing your coconuts, your pieces. Very simple skill to learn. Much easier, in my experience, than learning to have a grip on the board. Okay, so in my head, these three things are what lead a player to break that 1,000 barriers. That's 1250 ChessCom. And finally, before I hand this over, I realize this is a little bit of a rant I'm going on. That what I have observed time and again is that the opening study has not only just been some flim-flam thing that distracts them from what they actually need to do, but it actively hurts their chess progress. And what I see time and again is somebody has a conception in their head of the way the pieces are supposed to move, and then they're not actually thinking about what's going on with their opponent's moves. And they're just making this little setup thing that they've learned somewhere. And what's terrible about it too is, like, you do some opening course, there's going to be moves that don't follow principles, and they're going to remember those moves. And then when it comes to their game, they're not going to play principled chess. They're going to play some weird thing. And then that hurts their chess, because what you can develop is much easier, again, than developing a grip on the board, is the ability to bring out your pieces, your coconuts. They come out, and that you have to get religious about. It doesn't take that long to learn.
So to concretize, just in a couple words,
yeah,
one element of what Jesse's saying at the end there, Hammer, is like, imagine you teach somebody a system where they're going d takes e4 and then knight f6 and then bishop e7 and b6 and bishop b7, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, your lines might all feature white playing moves like knight f3 and knight c3 and bishop d3 and castles or something like that, right? But then these guys are going to get into some game and someone's going to play queen f3 instead of knight f3.
Yeah.
And somebody who doesn't have Jesse's grip on the board is going to be like, next I play bishop e7, and white plays like knight h3, and then they play b6, and white plays queen takes a8.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like what Jesse's warning happens.
Right. And let me just add a couple more things. the other thing that's a real disappointment for these players is they go and they learn this stuff and they kind of memorize it. But then when they play online and they play these games with their people in their cohort at their level, they're not playing the opening theory. They're playing rando moves. They don't develop their junk. And they love to like attack stuff. They like bring the queen out early. They will go like knight f6 to g4 and try to get bishop c5, f2. And that's what they're going to play for some junk like that. And it happens again and again and again. And the opening then just gets in their head and they're confused. To David's point, let me just say the classic example that I see all the time is somebody learns like the Najdorf and then they get obsessed with the move a6. But then you're playing some chump online who doesn't know what they're doing. A6 don't make a lot of sense in so many situations, but they'll play it anyway, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's like the opening knowledge then actually gets in the way of not only them playing good moves, but then developing a principled understanding of how to play the opening.
Yeah, I just checked the Lichess database because I was curious because this is an opening I've seen, and there's almost 500,000 games with the opening e4, e6, knight f3, d5, bishop b5 check. And just like a very confused like Rui Lopez player.
Right.
Rui Lopez player who hasn't noticed you're playing the French.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, it's a typical thing. But okay, I feel like Hammer should respond to because I think we all have the same criticism.
Hammer looks like he's ready to leave the show. Like
no, I'm sold. I'm sold. I agree. I think you make very, very reasonable points. I think players at the level we're talking should not be doing any course out there. It needs to be very, very tailored to their level if they're gonna go into opening exploring. And I do think that a couple of the points that Jesse addresses, I think is something that I have thought about when making my course. So to give two examples, my course is not necessarily focused on what are the best moves in the position. For in my case, my repertoire is for a black player. Mm-hmm. So for the white player, my focus is not necessarily on what the best moves are, but it's on what is the most common based on the Lichess database. Mm-hmm. The Lichess database is a fantastic resource because it gives you access to all these online games that have been played at the level that you seek to target. Okay. So for my course specifically, I think I checked. So basically, you can just search through games played, and then you can do rating ranges and the average rating between the opponents in the game. You can put to whatever you'd like. I think I put it at 1,400 maximum average rating between the two players. And then I based a lot of my focus on which moves are the most common in those rating brackets. So, okay. For instance, I have a huge chapter in the advanced French when black goes c5 to attack the center. The most common move there at the lower levels is knight to f3, which is a move I wouldn't give much attention at all if it was like a very, top level, this is cutting edge stuff, because it gives black the option of trying to break up the white pawn chain very early on. But because players at that level, having sought advice from people like yourselves, they have learned that it's good to prioritize getting their pieces out or whatever it is Jesse called it. And so that's one of the moves that make the most sense to them. And in response, which addresses another point here, one that I think David tried to refute pretty well, is that I don't recommend a trade between the pawns, even though it does break up White's pawn chain, because that would go against my recommendations in other areas. So in order to keep the very same base plan, and avoid a point that Jesse was making, that you're always gonna do something different in certain lines, I've strived very, very hard to make sure that I'm always recommending plans and that I stick with the same plans within the same pawn structures. So there's a different plan for the French and for the every other first move opening, and there's a different plan between the advanced French and the French exchange. But I try to stay very within the same plan, regardless of how White responds, as long as the pawn structure kind of allows that to be viable. And to David's point about someone bringing their queen out early and suddenly you drop a rook in the corner, I think that's a great point. And I think that's probably going to happen to quite a few people who use my course, but I don't think it's going to happen more than once. So I still think the learning value of getting the pieces out there, putting your pawns in the center, and getting castled early is quite good. Even if there are pitfalls that you are going to fall for, there is a learning curve to any opening, and you have to actually have the ability to adapt based on your opponent playing certain unexpected moves. Most of the time, you can just do the same plan as you've always intended. That has been my goal with the course, that the same plans is good no matter what the opponent does. But in the very good example that David gave, where there is an exception to that, I trust people to make some learnings on their own, and actually think about, okay, what happened here? What was special about this situation? And can I avoid it in the future?
One thing actually I want to clarify is a lot of people, one reason I want to have this podcast is we have discontent. We have discontent in the dojo because a lot of people, there's a strong minority. I do believe it's a minority, but they're out there and they're like, Cry doesn't let me study any openings. He says openings are terrible. What are you doing to me? He's obviously a jerk. It's obviously unfair. It's obviously untrue. And what I want to stress is,
I don't think people should be playing the Najdorf as their first opening. Let's just put it there.
In any case,
I think this is interesting, right? Because it's all, there's nuance to everything.
Okay.
And just for me listening to you say that people they study the Najdorf, that is wild to me. The Najdorf breaks so many general opening principles that you need to have as the foundation before you can break the principles. You need to know the principles. And this is something that's often said about grandmasters, right? That, oh yeah, no, he studied this with the chess engines, right? And it breaks every kind of normal rule of thumb there is, but he's allowed to do that because he knows he's breaking the rule of thumb. He's made preparation. He has good memory and whatnot. But when you kind of start out in chess, and if you end up wanting to do some opening work at an early stage, you need to choose openings and or courses that are specifically targeted towards your rating range and that follows the opening principles, puts an emphasis on pawns in the center, developing your pieces, getting your king to safety. These are the three things that you need to know about openings. The difference between what you're teaching people and what I'm doing is that you guys say pawns in the center, get your coconuts out, and get your king to safety. Yes. Whereas I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not explicitly saying these things. I'm teaching by example.
You're showing them, here's 30 examples of bringing out a coconut.
Kind of, yeah. I'm every variation has pawns in the center as the first two moves. Then every variation is like get your pieces out and a prioritization of king safety. It's not something that I've always written explicitly that this is what we're doing because it's the opening principles. But I think kind of people catch on to it after a long while.
You know what we have? We give it to them explicitly. For everyone under 1200, basically, we have one video that says, central control, bringing out the pieces, watching out for threats and captures while you're doing those two things, finding an area of the board that's going to be best for your king to be in. And then that's like it, we're like, watch that one video and now play whatever openings you want with these ideas in mind.
But here's my issue. And I'm currently working on a Chessable course about the fried liver attack. But one of the reasons I've chosen to focus on that next is because that is the most common opening at sub, I think, 1800. Most common moves, immediately attacking black at their weak spot, close to their king, forcing very trickiness from the get-go.
That's where
I think one of my goals of this course, and one of the reasons it was the only thing I was always sure of, is that there's no chance I'm going to be recommending the open games to start off, is because in the open games as black, you are so exposed to so many tricky ways for the opponent to play and try and blast open the center and try to create an immediate attack on your position. And I wanted people to be able to focus on learning their rook versus king checkmates, queen versus king checkmates, your basic pawn endgames, and your tactics with the hanging pieces. Because
now you're listing all the things that we do have for the players under 1200.
Yeah, but this is also what I did with Benji, right? I'm following the recipe that I used with Benji, and I guess I mean we both had the same idea because frankly it's a good idea and we are good teachers. I think everyone in this call is a very, very good teacher. And I wanted Benji to be able to focus on these things without having the demotivating experience of getting absolutely crushed on the board in the opening, because I wanted him to be able to not lose motivation with his chess. Benji, being one of the very best esports players in the world, he's immensely competitive. And that means
demotivated.
That means if you lose, I think that is I think competitive people get demotivated when you lose. And I realized that being as competitive as I am and being as competitive as Benji is, that's not normal. I do realize that, but I still feel like the basic principle of losing is demotivating applies to a wider audience, and that's why it makes sense to give people a foundation that allows them to say, okay, I have these basic principles I know that I'm going to follow in the opening, but not only the principles, I have the moves that exemplify these principles. And if I've learned my plan in the Queen's Gambit and English and all the other first moves, that's like one basic plan. And then the plan against the advanced French, the exchange French, and then the Rubinstein. If I have those four things and knowledge of those four different pawn structures, I don't use that word, of course, but that's in reality what it is. I branch it out into different pawn structures because different pawn structures have different plans, and then they are set to go. And I really recognize something that Jesse said about board. He used a special word, but when I played at the Berkeley Chess School back in the day, where it all started with both David and Jesse familiar with chess in Berkeley. That's where I started competing as a kid, and my chess coach at Oxford Elementary School, he told my parents that I wasn't like spectacular in any way, but I was good. I was 900 USCF at age 9. And my coach told my parents, "Oh, he's got such good board vision." And my parents were very like, that's what they've been telling me since, because they felt like that sounded important. Board vision, the ability to see the whole board. And I definitely recognize what Jesse says, and that's a super crucial skill. And that's something I worked on with Benji. Benji, even when he was like 1400 rapid, he still struggled with the pawn capturing diagonally. Like we would have like that was like the one really weird thing about him. Because we did basically all the tactics. We never did like just any sort of tactical exercise. We always did on chess.com. You can sort by tags, and we only did the tag hanging pieces. We only focused on his ability of seeing when there was the ability to capture a piece. In the beginning, it was just about capturing a piece that was free for the taking. And as he got better, you can adjust the ratings on chess.com, and you can just, if you do only hanging pieces but increase the rating level, then you go from being able to capture a piece in one move to being able to capture a piece in two moves. The difficulty goes up just a little bit.
Some kind of double attack, right?
Yeah, for instance. And that's what's so brilliant about puzzles as a learning tool, because it never grows old. If people come into my stream and ask, how can I get better at chess, without any control questions, I can tell them that you'll get a long way with doing puzzles or tactics and playing games online. Because as you become a better player, the level of your opposition and the level of your puzzles increase. So that's going to be a successful recipe for you, even from 800 all the way up to 2800.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
Done. I don't think our approach or our views or values even on this are very different. I just think that there is definitely a value to openings. It is a quick fix. It's a cheat code. And it's a cheat code that I don't mind people using if it means their motivation for chess stays true longer than it would otherwise. And what I will say also about your whole universe, of which I am an admirer, and you know, I've been following you. I've known David since, oh gosh, almost 20 years now.
Since you were a competitive little kid.
Same with Jesse. And like I think I've followed the stuff you do, and I think it's great. But the dojo, by definition, has very, very motivated people.
You know,
that's a reasonable thing to say.
Well, let me just say, because I get to watch all these people, is that the dojo has a lot of motivated people in it, but it's got to be said, there's a little bit of a Planet Fitness thing sometimes going on. And what I mean by that is somebody who gets a gym membership and then it's like, that was my resolution. I'm not actually going to the gym anytime soon. In any case, we do have a hardcore group of people. It's just not everyone in the dojo is motivated. It's got to be said.
And in some cases, it works against them, because even though they've subscribed to the program, they've paid for it, they'll spend time researching other programs, other courses they could be doing, always looking for that like next best thing, which we often feel maybe those are good ideas, but it still gets in the way of like just doing the work. Like we often just preach consistency and staying true. I just want to say on the opening thing, like I totally agree with Hammer on the motivation thing. I think that's a huge part of this that for a lot of people is just the biggest factor. It's just like opening study is fun. And whenever you get into any game, there's always going to be a point where like you Google like what's the best setup or what's the best character or what's the best strategy or whatever. And it's like for people getting into chess, that's going to be the opening. It's like such a natural place to look to get some kind of grip on the game and like get out of the gate. I would just advise people against spending all their time on openings, spending a lot of time on openings. It's like if you want to do a little bit, that's fine. Like if someone keeps getting you with some stupid gambit and like you don't know what to do against it, like yeah, look it up. Like watch the video, look up what to do against it. Like you gotta like manage your chess, right? But I would say people end up overdoing it. They get a course. Let me just say Hammer's course, very short compared to Chessable's other courses, which are like thousands and thousands of lines. And we have people that Hammer is aiming the course for getting these like huge, massive courses, thinking that like they need to study all this stuff, which is like absurd. So I would say like if you're going to study the openings, like just do a little bit, just study the stuff you're seeing in your games, if that. I would say like don't study like extra stuff, just like look at the stuff that you've already seen or you got in the game, you didn't know what to do against it, then you want to check the course. Like I think that's okay. Basically, don't spend a lot of your time on it. You know,
the way I kind of advertise my course, which by the way, I'm very, very proud to say right now, it has some, I'm so proud. It has some glowing reviews and it has a 4.98 rating. In 45 reviews.
Good.
Yeah, I was checking out the reviews before our show. Congratulations. Yeah. They're very positive.
It's incredible. But I agree with everything, well, most of the things that you say. And one of the things that I write in my introduction to the course is that this course is not about winning chess games. It's about surviving the opening so that you can spend your training time doing other things than worrying about, am I going to just lose right out of the gate?
Mm-hmm.
And I am sincere in that. And well, I realize some people may not necessarily always take my word for it, but the goal isn't to have people study it nonstop. The goal is to have people spend quite a bit of time on it so that they have some understanding of what it is, where to put the pieces. But once you have that understanding, you shouldn't have to really study more openings until you're at quite a higher level, because then my goal is that you're set for some time and you can start working on your end games and your other important areas.
Yeah, you made a comment long ago about the motivation and demotivation. The motivation of catching somebody in a trap and how that pumps you up to get somebody with a trap, and the demotivation of getting blown out, right? And it seems like your course actually doesn't involve setting a lot of specific traps or trying to get somebody in a certain pattern. It's more about avoiding the demotivating experience, right? And just play a full team as much as possible.
That's my goal, but at the same time, if someone plays the French advance, which is the most common way, the French advance and the French exchange are the most common ways, according to the Lichess under 1400 database. Using the knight to protect the French pawn in the middle, almost unheard of at very low levels. Yeah. And once you push that pawn forward, black players are going to win the pawn on b2 a ridiculous amount of the time. Either b2 or d4 is going to fall. That's just what happens almost always. And that is kind of an opening trap, but it's a consequence of the opening that's being played. So a lot of people are going to get very quick wins just because they're familiar with the plans. But my goal is, like you say, it's not to make it filled with traps. Right. It's just that sometimes traps are a natural consequence of in this example, the French advance.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that winning the pawn on b2 or d4 is still kind of like early days in a game at this level. It's not the kind of trap like, d4, e5, and then they try and play, queen e7, queen b4, queen b2, bishop b4, winning the queen on c3 or something, right? It's not these like, I knock you out in 7 moves with like a checkmate or a knight f7 or something, right? You win a pawn at this level, it's still basically a toss-up what the result will be. And it's important that you know how to play that position when you've spent 1 or 2 tempi to collect a pawn on d4 or b2.
Yeah, but at the same time, then I don't want to go too deep.
Yeah, I'm not saying you should.
Yeah.
I'm just saying like the game will, it's not a game deciding trap, right? It's something that can happen. White can lose the pawn on b4 or b2. In my experience, the game simply goes on at that point.
Yeah. Well, I think also Chessable doesn't have a lot of users rated below 1,000, which means that from the people who have provided feedback on the course so far, they have been able to win quite a bit with just these kind of winning a pawn in the opening, often winning 2 pawns, because once one falls, there's usually another one that's in trouble afterwards. Right. And so, but that's also about the Chessable platform, right? The platform.
So you're saying, like, a lot of these people using your course are actually a couple 100 points stronger than what you'd first intended. If you give them 2 pawns, they're starting to convert with some regularity.
That's my impression. But my hope is that chess.com, I understand, is currently in the process of integrating Chessable on the chess.com user face, or how you want to say it.
Right.
My understanding is that when you've played an opening on chess.com and the game review, it will start suggesting courses that you can use to kind of improve.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that sort of integration is gonna expose my course to
more
players of the level you were actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So a couple things I want to say. So first of all, when the dojo started, we had a big debate of when do people start do opening study. And so back then we had 12 to 1300 in our system, which is 1450 ChessCom and about 1800 Lichess. We said, all right, they can start doing a little bit. So it's not that we're saying you can't do opening work. It's just that it starts around that level. Then Kostya was like, no. We got to give them a taste a little bit in the 1100 to 1200. It'll be 13, 14, 15. Me and David were like, a taste? How about a lick, Kostya? So Kostya had to settle for a lick. So they do get a lick at 1250.
I'm a voice of the people.
1350, 1450, they get a lick. And it ramps up from there. So it's not like we're saying it's unimportant. I just want to make that very clear. The other thing I want to say about what Hammer is calling motivation. All right, let me say something about this. What my experience of what he's calling motivation is what I think of as the fancy tennis racket. Okay, so imagine you're a beginner tennis player and you see some, people who play great and they got this nice racket, dude. And you're like, damn, if I had that racket, bro, I'd be hosing these fools. And of course, that's not true. Right? We all know that's not true, but the feeling, we've all had that feeling, right? We've all had the feeling of well, they're good and they're doing it, so I should do it too, right? That's a sense of emulation, right? You see someone better than yourself and you try to emulate them. That feeling of wanting to emulate is, of course, not a dumb feeling. But what Hammer's talking about motivation, I feel like it's like these people come in and they get their fancy tennis racket, they get a course or whatever, and then there's kind of a placebo effect that a lot of times happen. They feel empowered, right? And Hammer was talking too, and I think this happens at maybe higher levels, and he mentioned it as well. It's like when your chess has hit a plateau, maybe you need that fancy tennis racket, Get yourself out there, son, and hit the ball with a little bit more confidence. And I definitely think from personal experience watching other players, especially players a little bit higher rated, but even in this lower rated, I can feel they're like, oh, I feel empowered. I have a friend who just started, a pandemic player, watched some Levy Roseman video on the dragon, and he just can't stop it. He just wants to play the dragon all the time. And he's rated about 600, 700. He's just like, give me it. I'll hose you with my dragon, fool. And he's really into it. So it has emboldened him. He was motivated by it. I think it's a false motivation, right? But, I recognize it as a psychological thing. Now, to this end, I want to talk a little bit about the Chessable business. So before this latest controversy, which I suppose we'll get into, the thing that Chessable did there was a prior controversy that had less buzz around it, but I think it was actually more substantive. So back in the day when Chessable started, they would be like some fancy course. They're almost all with a lot of lines, highfalutin even for me at a GM level. And then, though, they would give you this skeleton, and they called it the short and sweet. It was a way to give you something for free without having to buy the course. And then the hope would be, I'm going to do an upsell to either buy the video or get the full course. And a lot of beginner level players, by the way, we haven't really quantified what beginner is. To my mind, there's I feel like 12, 750 right there. You're an average chess.com. That's a valuable number. I feel 1250 chess.com's another valuable number, and maybe 1450 is another valuable number. Obviously, there's different, huge degrees of difference in there. But so what they did then was they were like, oh no, these people are all getting this course for free and they're having great success with it. And they don't actually need these big old fancy courses that we have. They're just using this short and sweet as a skeleton. So then they switched it a couple years ago. And then they were like, oh, you know what? We're going to give you some fancy variations, but we're not going to give you the skeleton. So it's kind of like they're going to give you a car that's kind of fancy, but all messed up. It's like missing the engine and stuff, And from that point, they're going to try to upsell you to the full course. So that kind of ruined the short and sweet, which was a very valuable thing for beginner level players. And that was the kind of thing.
Business-wise, that made a lot of sense, right? Because if they're giving you something that you can just use, and it turns out you don't need the more complicated course unless you're a grandmaster, then it's much better for them to say, here's what Hammer recommends in the advanced French, and give you that in like a good version, right? And then say, but if you want to know what he recommends against e takes d5 and knight c3 and bishop d3, then buy the course, right? That makes a lot more sense.
Well, and then so that they would also say then that their latest move, where they have done this thing where they're saying that the let me make sure I get. By the way, they've kind of dialed it back. We're not exactly sure where it's landing, but there were all of these courses that were available, the short and sweets, and now they're hidden behind a paywall. You have to be a pro user. Even things, because anybody can make a Chessable course. There's like people like me and Hammer that have worked with their team, done fancy videos, yada yada. And so we have those courses out there. But you can be just anybody. And you can put a course out there, and loads of people did, and they put them up there for free. But then Chessable's like, well, now we're going to put them behind the paywall. And that, that's going to drive people insane, including the people who made the courses, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also, rightfully so. That was very surprising. I mean, those are like community courses. That was strange. When I heard about it at first, I thought it was like, okay, they got, the rights to the short and sweets, the lifetime repertoires. They want to put the short and sweets behind the paywall. That's going to be unpopular, but I mean, whatever, it's their material. I didn't think they were going to be like paywalling random course that like some expert rated chess coach just puts out there to like get a little bit of attention to their content.
Yeah, paywalling the short and sweets doesn't seem like a good business move to me. I would say you want to calibrate the short and sweets to be a taste that makes people want to do your stuff. I don't understand trying to paywall the short and sweets business-wise behind like the membership, but it's fine. It's their prerogative, right? They own the stuff. They made it, paid for it to be made.
Well, Chessable authors get a revenue or percentage splits from the courses that's sold,
right?
But the Chessable authors, despite having also made the short and sweets, do not have a revenue split in that, because that would then be kind of a mass thing. So I'm not sure from the author's perspective it's completely without controversy either, because they are monetizing content with which doesn't then kind of drip on the authors themselves afterwards. That being said, the only short and sweet I did is for my NIMSO repertoire, and my NIMSO course I spent 3 years on. I put so much work into it. It's good enough for me to play as quite a good grandmaster.
Yeah.
But what I've come to realize after completing it is that this is not the content I want to do, because anyone can make maybe this is a bit harsh, but I think anyone can make a lot of moves that kind of put together is an opening for very high level players. because now we have the chess engines, we have the databases, we know past games, we know what requires nuance in the world today is knowing when to recommend things that are not the move recommended by the chess engine, putting something into a perspective where it's not necessarily the top engine choice, but it is the best choice because it's the easiest thing to remember based on other recommendations you have in the same course. And what I've come to realize is that I don't really care about my NIMSO course whatsoever anymore, because that's not what I want to bring into the chess world. I want to be the guy who caters to the masses, because what we are realizing now after COVID is that most people are not 1,800 club players wanting the best of the best, and even higher rated than that as well. Most people are starting out, dipping their toes, and need different content, which is why also I'm saying to what Jesse was talking about earlier, students of his playing, the dragon and the Najdorf Sicilians, those things that often break some of the opening principles that you often rely on starting out in the game. That just the instinct in my bones is that, but that's not really the best for this target audience. And so when I'm saying that I am pro chess opening learnings from an early stage, that is with a lot of asterisks. One of which definitely includes the courses should be catered to that level, which I'm trying to do, and a lot of other people are trying to do now on Chessable. I think Chessable has realized that if this merger with chess.com and the integration is really going through, then we don't really have material that is suitable for the masses. So they've been in the last year and a half, they've been very into trying to expand their library in that direction. That's where I think openings can be okay.
I love that you have such focus on your mission and very clearly what you're motivated to do and what you want to do. And I'd like to invite you to try making a Chess Dojo style opening course to sell on our site. And I would love to be able to show you what our courses look like and invite you to try and make one in our style and see what you think of it. But I also have a question for you about your current course. How many hours do you envision a player spending learning your course? Because I feel like to some extent you're saying things like you want them to be able to study it and then they've got it. They know their themes, they're getting their pieces out, and they can work on other things, right? You've said that a few times. Like you want them to go work on their king and pawn endings or do more puzzles and tactics without worrying about getting blown out. So how many hours would you think a 1,000 rated player, as just an example, somewhere in the middle of your range, how many hours do you think a 1,000 player should spend with your course before they can move on to studying their king and rook checkmate or the bishop pair checkmate?
Yeah, but that's not really how learning works, is it? Okay. I remember I had a high school teacher who said you have to repeat something 7 times to commit to memory.
You expect them to learn it and then repeat some of the stuff.
Well,
to some extent they're repeating it by playing it, but you want them to do some spaced repetition on your lines too.
Yeah, and repeating by playing is of course fine.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking maybe 20 hours total. But that 20 hours you can't you can't just study it for 20 hours and then you're going to know it, right? You're going to have to study it for 2 hours, then you play for 2 hours, then you look at the games that you played and you kind of see, oh, these are the mistakes I made. So you still have to analyze. And then if the mistake you made was obvious, you can maybe check with the engine, and the engine says, well, if you just avoid the rook in the corner being captured, you're good. Just, take some care for that. Or if there's not an obvious explanation to what went wrong, then you have to go back into the material and try and figure out, what can I do differently? Was there something that I had misunderstood in my learning of the course? And then kind of, learning is such a difficult process, right? And learning, there's a huge discussion every time, always, about what is talent. And to me, talent is, the ability to learn. And some people may have the ability to learn better in certain areas than in others. Someone can be good at learning chess stuff, while others can be good at learning drawing. And that can be something that this weird concept of talent is. But everything has to be learned and everything has to be studied. No one is innately good at something, I think.
Yeah. Talent for learning you can apply to every field. That's super useful. But people are also going to have individual talents, which will be reflected as different things are easier for them to learn, or different skills are easier to acquire for some people than others.
Yeah, but then I guess what I'm saying is that I think talent is being good at learning something. It's not automatically being good at something, but it's being good at learning that thing so that it feels effortless.
Or maybe the most important talent is being able to learn things. And you may have your other talents or proclivities.
Okay. Any final words? That was a great talk.
I guess I'm wondering who among you is sold.
Nobody, buddy. Nobody.
I feel like we're all at different. Like we're all in different. It's not like it's black and white. Either you study openings or you don't. It's like we all just think you got to study the openings a slightly different amount, right? And it's like the way you approach it. But
do you think 20 hours is outrageously much?
Right. So like one of the kindest things I could say is 20 hours isn't so bad. It could be so much worse. It could be 50 hours, 100 hours.
And it sounds like a lot of these players, even though Chessable is calling them either novice or beginner category, are actually around 1,300 or something like that. And for them to do 20 hours, that's far less of a crime than somebody at 800. Far less of a crime.
Yeah.
So I'm saved by the fact that Chessable doesn't have the players of the range that you're trying to discourage.
A lot of times when you, as a teacher, no matter how experienced, a lot of times you make teaching material, you aim it at like 1,000 to 1,200, and it turns out it's really good for 1,200 to 1,400 instead of 1,000 to 1,200. Just because like we've gotten so, once you're a master, you're so far away from that. It's very easy to overshoot a little bit, and then the material can be.
I'm not ready. I'm not ready to make that admission to concede defeat there. Just yet. I think the reason right now that the feedback is coming in at a higher level is simply because Chessable doesn't have that the user base to cover that even lower level.
I mean, I still remember making videos for Chess Kid, right? That I was aiming at first in my head, I was aiming them at like 5 to 7 year olds who have just learned how the pieces move, right? And have like never played in a tournament. And then like I would get messages from parents or coaches who were like, oh yeah, that was a great video. I like learned this stuff from it. And I'm like, uh-oh, overshot a little bit.
So, okay. I just want to say my final thoughts on this. Ultimately, I feel like I agree with Jesse, something Jesse said a lot earlier, that like the biggest mistakes people make in the games are not going to be happening in the openings. It's going to be happening in the middle game, especially the end game. Like catastrophic decider mistakes very often happening. End games, king and pawn end games. At the same time, I totally get the instinct and the pull to study openings and have some kind of concrete grip on the opening and know exactly what you're doing. Also, something that Hammer specifically moved me today in the debate is like, before I used to really think like it doesn't matter what opening you play at lower levels, just like whatever opening you play, you can figure it out, analyze your games. But like now, actually, I am kind of shifting towards maybe it does make sense to be a little bit more specific, like choosing a very safe opening like the French when you're just starting out, so you don't get cracked on F7 every single game. I remember teaching some kids who would just like cry. I remember the tears in their eyes game after game when the fried liver would like mess them up because they didn't react properly. Like, so I totally get that instinct to like protect beginners. And then at a certain point, like graduate them up to an E4, E5 or a Sicilian. Just like have people play different openings. That would be my one gripe about it. Like, don't just play the French your whole life. Like, switch it around, learn new positions once you're ready. But that's something I totally think does make some sense. Just being thoughtful about what openings you recommend for really inexperienced players.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think something that we agree with you on, Hammer, is that like motivation is important. So if somebody's really into end games, we'll say, sure, study some end games. If somebody's really into openings, sure, study some openings. If you like doing tactics, sure, do some tactics. Like you can lean in to whatever a player enjoys doing or gets motivated by, as long as that also means that they're going to, work on other things at some point.
All right.
Okay, cool. Hammer, it was a joy having you. These 2 podcasts. Oh, it was great, man. It was great having you here.
Well, I'm just happy that I got that little bit from Kostya, who I know is the softest target in the group. But that I made a little difference in his thinking. I guess I'll have to be happy with that.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Bye.